are some prominent thinkers, among them Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk and Bill Gates, who think that your line of work in artificial intelligence poses an existential threat to humanity.
Instead of thinking about, well, what is AI doing as a threat to humanity, I would actually question the type of workspaces that these individuals are creating.
Hello and welcome to A Theory of Everything. I'm Luis Razo, the director of ASEM and host of this channel. Today I'm talking to Professor Saiph Savage. Savage was recently named one of the top 35 innovators under 35 by the MIT Technology Review for her work in civic technology and artificial intelligence. She's currently the director of the Human-Computer Interaction Lab at West Virginia University and the co-director of the Civic Innovation Lab at the UNAM in Mexico City. She's worked with many governments and international organizations to improve the lives of underserved people, including at the moment, many of the so-called hillbillies, and I use the term respectfully, in the Appalachia region of the United States. Imagine the irony of an academic being brought in from Mexico City, where Savage is from, to alleviate the plight of poverty-stricken, pro-Trump workers in rural West Virginia. One of the highlights of our discussion, from my perspective, is Savage's call for people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates to worry less about the hypothetical existential threat of AI and more about the actual threat posed by the workspaces they're creating. Another highlight is the ever-present and growing challenge of figuring out ways to stop human polarization, which you'll recognize as one of the central themes and concerns of this channel. As always, you'll find a timestamp in the video description. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing what you think. Professor Savage, you are in Seattle. I'm in Barcelona. Welcome to A Theory of Everything, and thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here.
There is a question that I like to start most of my interviews with, and I think it takes on special relevance in this case because of your work in artificial intelligence. And the question is this: would you agree or disagree that the worst thing that could possibly happen from a human perspective is for humanity to go extinct tomorrow?
So I think that question depends a lot. That's a very interesting question. So thank you for starting the discussion with that. B, I think that question depends on what is a person's belief system. So if you are a person, maybe you believe that Earth is a prison planet, let's say, and your souls were maybe kidnapped by aliens, and you're here on Earth, maybe the fact that you are now extinct is that your soul was able to free itself from what you know as Earth. And so in that case, you would say, no, this is actually great. Our souls are free from this prison planet. But maybe if you're thinking about it as a law of survival, where the fittest are the ones that are living and are not getting extinct, then yes, it makes sense to say that that would be the worst thing that could happen. But I think that question depends a lot on your belief system and what you believe is life on Earth, and the meaning that you're giving to it.
Okay, I suppose I ask, it's especially relevant in this case because there are some prominent thinkers, among them Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk and Bill Gates, who think that your line of work in artificial intelligence poses an existential threat to humanity. I'm curious to know what you think about this position.
So when I think about Bill Gates or Elon Musk, when they're thinking about AI creating an existential threat to humanity, I would actually question more about the type of workspaces that they have created with their industry. So, for instance, a lot of recent studies have come out where tech workers, 60% of tech workers actually 65% of tech workers, and this was done by Blind, suffer burnout. These are the companies that Bill Gates, Elon Musk are creating. That's a threat to workers in terms of a worker who is suffering burnout is no longer functional. Their own existence, they're questioning their own existence. You have actually a really high rate of tech workers who are suffering depression, who many times are committing suicide. So instead of thinking about, well, what is AI doing as a threat to humanity, I would actually question the type of workspaces that these individuals are creating. I don't necessarily think that this has to be the way that it is. I think that we can reimagine, for instance, these large tech companies. What do they look like, and how do they treat their tech workers? And so instead of playing their game and questioning AI, I would instead question the type of structures, the type of organizations that they are creating themselves, and really question about what type of reality are they creating.
Okay, well, that's an interesting response. So your approach is more practical and down to earth, less theoretical, and more, let's see the fruits of what your work is actually doing, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that it is practical, but it is also so I do use a lot of theory for my work. There, I think that it's very relevant to go back and look at critical theory. So the critical theory came from the School of Oxford, sorry, the Frankfurt School. And basically, a lot of the things that they were doing was analyzing the technology, analyzing a lot of the institutions that were created, and looking at it from a critical standpoint. So so I use that a lot for my own research. So instead of creating maybe a new philosophy, what they were looking at was criticizing the world that we know, if that makes sense. And so I use a lot of that theory for how I analyze and study the world.
That's very good. So from the Frankfurt School, the critical or the main perspective is from the, if I remember right, from the perspective of power, right? How power influences social structure. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, very interesting. So tell us a little bit about your intellectual interests, or your what got you interested in AI, and academically as an intellectual. Tell us about your background, your how you got into this.
So in my undergraduate, I was able to specialize in AI, and they had different types of specializations. One was software engineering, other was AI. There was also cybersecurity. I went into AI because I felt that that might be an area where I couldn't as easily learn about it on my own. For instance, software engineering, maybe there's a lot of material online. I also felt that I could learn a lot about it if I went into industry, which I have. I worked at Microsoft, for instance, for 2 years. And so I got into an area which I felt wasn't as easy to get into externally. And that part of AI was very helpful for learning to do a lot of new types of interactions. AI is very powerful and allows us to create these self-driving cars, these virtual assistants who can help us with a lot of things. But then I started using critical theory to start to question a lot about the technology that we are creating. And as you mentioned, questioning those power relationships. And that drove me to start to create now co-design technology where I'm using AI to help workers. Because as you mentioned, you can use critical theory to start to question the power relationships that exist.
Very good. So let's get into the kind of work you do. Can you go into more detail about this worker relationships?
Yeah, on one hand, part of my research has focused on designing tools through which I study what type of work, what type of conditions are workers exposed to. And so through this, I identified that workers on certain digital platforms were earning less than minimum wage. They didn't have, they had very limited opportunities to grow and develop themselves. And so from this, and I was able to quantify that. From this, I then started to develop tools to help workers to start to learn, to start to be able to develop their skills and also start to earn higher wages. Here I'm using AI to learn strategies that are the most effective for helping workers develop their skills and also earn higher wages.
And what is the relationship in your view to power in this kind of dynamic?
So the platforms have focused a lot on digital labor platforms have focused a lot on making the employer happy. And so here they have done really good work in terms of ensuring quality, in terms of what the workers are doing, and also ensuring that the cost for employers gets reduced drastically. But this in turn has created a dynamic where workers are doing a lot of invisible labor for which they're not getting paid, and that makes their wages go down drastically. And so part of my work, what I'm doing is helping workers to better manage their invisible labor and also better navigate the platform so that they can conduct their different goals, which the platforms are not necessarily focused on because they're not bringing them profit.
I see. And do you see the technology as a whole leading to more fairness or justice in societies, or is it making things more unjust?
I think that it has both possibilities. So technology can definitely amplify inequalities, but we have the power to define how we want technology, the direction that we want technology to have. And so here we really have to sit down and analyze, okay, how might this technology further escalate inequalities? How might it create certain social divisions? And so this is something that I do a lot with the tools that I'm building, because even the tools that I'm building can also create more social divisions. For instance, maybe the workers that are exposed to my tools have access to them. They might be able to now access higher wages, and that is creating a new type of social divisions even between workers. The workers who don't have access to my tools now maybe are less empowered and are now exposed to even worse jobs. And so all the time when I'm designing, I'm thinking about precisely that. How might technology create more social divisions? And what type of power relationships am I facilitating with my tools? One of the things that I'm focused a lot on is bringing a balance. So aiming to weed out those tensions so that each actor, each stakeholder can have more power, especially the ones that have been forgotten, have more power on the table.
Yeah, good point. I think I see this as a little bit, or not a little bit, quite challenging because there are so many differences between individuals and their individual motivations, their individual talents. So how is it possible to create a system or a tool that doesn't polarize or separate the most talented and ambitious individuals from the less talented and ambitious individuals? Is that possible, do you think?
Right now, I'm focused a lot on one hand on personalized type of recommender systems. So you could think about right now we have already developed, for instance, personalized recommender systems that tell you what books you should read so that you can buy more, show you ads again so that you're going to be clicking through it. And what I'm doing is I'm just focusing these recommender systems now on the different goals that people might have. And it's fine if people have different goals. And it can also be, for instance, that somebody says, you know what, I'm actually happy with my job currently, and I don't want any changes. You know what, that's perfectly fine as well. I think that we need to accept the different types of goals that people might have, and not impose to people that all of the time they have to be evolving and getting better. I think that it's also perfectly acceptable if somebody feels happy with the type of job that they're doing and their type of circumstances, and we should also respect that.
Well, very interesting. These topics are so relevant, it seems, to a lot of what's happening in the US now and pretty much in every corner of the world, especially in West Virginia, where you are the director of the HCI lab at West Virginia University. Curiously enough, that's in the Appalachia region of the US, where a very popular book was written a few years ago named Hillbilly Elegy. Do you know the book?
Yes, yes.
And just out of curiosity, you're in the region. What is your take on the book? And are you working with the locals in this area?
Yes. So we are actually working with the locals in the area. So one of the things that we're doing is we teamed up with public libraries in West Virginia, and we're using the public libraries as spaces where we can educate rural workers to develop their digital skills so that they can now access better jobs. Part of it is the problem is that a lot of these workers at home might not have good internet connectivity, but in the public library, they are able to now access good internet, and we're using this space to teach workers how they might be able to develop their skills. I think that part of it is, so when we're teaching these rural workers, one of the things it is considering the ideology and mentality that they might have. So one of the things that we get a lot is workers who tell us, no, you know what, I'm not a tech person. And so this is an image that they have about themselves in which they consider themselves that they're not a tech person. They have a certain stereotype of what they can and can't do. And this creates a limitation this creates a barrier for them to learn these new digital skills. And so part of the work is also understanding that they might have those barriers and that we can work with them to help them to now develop new types of that they can, if they wanted to, they can develop new skills. And so I think on one hand, it is understanding that a lot of the individuals who are from this region have certain stereotypes about themselves, about what they can do. And it's working with them to tell them that, no, they can also, if they wanted to, they can also be involved in this tech world. And I think that it's taking the time to understand their needs and characteristics. For instance, right now, we are developing courses for them. Microsoft actually gave us a lot of course material that they had, but the course material was not at all tailored for the region. And so right now what we're doing is that we're adapting it. And so I think that it's important to understand the culture that is involved with different rural regions and adapt courses to them. And I think that rural regions actually have a lot to input into technology, and I think that's a great opportunity to start to think about how we can better engage with these communities, also understanding their different values that they might have. For these rural regions, this type of digital online work is actually very helpful because a lot of jobs have been lost in the region. And so this means that you have a lot of towns that have turned into ghost towns because people need to leave the region to find work in cities. With online digital jobs, now people can stay in their town and they're able to find work without necessarily needing to leave their hometown, if that makes sense. And so that is a huge advantage.
Very nice. And how would you rate the success of the program? How have things gone?
It has been hard. We're starting. I think that it is important to understand that all of this takes time. So COVID on one hand has affected us because we're not able to do in-person meetings. For these rural regions, in-person meetings are crucial because you have people who really don't know how to, for instance, get on Zoom to have a call. And so for us to teach them, we have to be in person with them in order to really guide them. And so COVID on one hand has created barriers for us to do these teachings. Another thing to consider is that within these rural regions, people have very different digital skills. So as I mentioned, for some people, just getting on a Zoom call is difficult. For others, they're already editing their websites on their own, and they're creating their own online businesses. We actually have some workers who are leaders in digital labor platforms. They're organizing all of the other workers, and they're from West Virginia. And so you have very different digital skills, and so that makes it hard to create a personalized program for each of them. And so overall, I would say that it's not simple. It's not simple, and you need to have patience, a lot of patience.
Yeah, very interesting. I find it especially interesting that it seems to mirror a larger problem that's been experienced in the social sciences for the past several decades, wherein you get very people with different talents and abilities taking advantage of different programs, educational programs, to varying degrees. So this is one of those paradoxes where the more we try to help a group of people or a region, the more that group actually becomes polarized. Is this something that you're seeing in the region, or is this not happening?
I would say within the region, no, but between regions, yes. So I am seeing, for instance, right now that I've been moving between the West Coast and you could say a little bit the East Coast. The Appalachia, I would say, is a mix of East Coast and its own little region because it's not completely Midwest. But I would say that there is, I've seen polarization between the East Coast and the West Coast. And it's a lot in terms of the ideology. I do think that we have to respect the culture from each region. And so I have done work on disinformation. And so for instance, from within West Virginia, we actually had a lot of people who were organizing for a certain political party, and they were very strong in how they were organizing. Here in the West Coast, for instance, a lot of people don't really understand how they could be supporting certain political parties or certain political actors. And that's creating, I think, polarization. And what I think is important is to realize when you are being polarized. And also, I think, give the other person a chance. Because a thing that I notice a lot is where certain individuals are dismissed completely because of their political beliefs, and that and people then stop engaging with them and just assume that they are maybe not wise, and that creates an even further barrier. I think that it is important to talk to other individuals, and for instance, there might be disagreements on certain things. We have to, I think, talk with each other and understand each other's point of view. And if something is completely incorrect, we can have discussions about why maybe it's incorrect, but in a slow. I think that it's important to have it in a slow way, because you have to understand that you yourself might even be polarized, and so you might not have the tolerance that you would normally have to discuss certain topics. But I think that polarization is dangerous because it it incites violence. And it also creates further barriers to reach other individuals. And so I think that here it is important to realize that maybe you might be polarized, and to maybe open up. For me, it's since I'm not originally from the US, it's easier for me many times to engage with individuals because I feel a little bit like I'm an outsider, and so it doesn't hit me maybe as personally as it would maybe if I were directly from the US. And so I found I'm able to speak to people that are supporting different political parties within the US much easier, I would say, than US nationals, precisely because I'm an outsider, and so I'm not as invested in the political fight, if that makes sense. But I think that that's key, not being a little bit, not investing yourself as much in a political fight so that you don't get polarized.
Well, very interesting. This polarizing of the American society, I think, is something that is especially troubling to many people. And in fact, a lot of this, or a lot of the political situation and division in the US is blamed on at least some of it is blamed on the technology. Can you talk a little bit about the role that technology has played in election processes, and if your work is directly related to this or not?
Yeah, I think that part of the problem is, on one hand, that a lot of social media platforms have been recommending content to individuals that that an individual will engage with. So, for instance, Facebook is going to aim to show you content that you will click, that you will like, that you will comment. A lot of that content might be something that relates to your own filter bubble. So something, for instance, maybe I'm a Democrat, and so Facebook is just then going to be showing me content related to Democrats because it knows that I'm going to like that content, I'm going to comment on that content. And on one hand, what that creates is that I stop engaging with the individuals who might not believe what I believe. And so when I encounter an individual who is different than me, I'm going to have the belief that I'm 100% correct because I've been fed just information that confirms my own beliefs. And so that can make me maybe even just stop engaging with other individuals who might think different than me because I've completely stopped being accustomed to seeing those individuals. On the other hand, these social media companies, many times what gets them the most clicks and comments is content that is controversial, that is polarizing. And so that again is going to be inciting violence from individuals, and it's further polarizing how people feel about an election process. And so on one hand, the social media platforms are facilitating that people are feeling more polarized towards certain political topics, again, because they're not exposed to what the other party is saying. And also because they are facilitating content that polarizes individuals. I think that here within this space, it is also important that these social media companies also provide more transparency about. I think that they need to assume a better role where they say that they are creators of news, and they should hold principles that are similar to journalists. For instance, right now, when Facebook takes down certain news reports that allegedly are fake news, or Twitter puts in certain notices about whether a tweet is fake or not, many times these companies are not completely transparent about why they are doing what they are doing, and it's not as easy to audit them. The problem with that is that if you can't audit them, this also facilitates that there are a lot of conspiracy theories right now about how big tech, for instance, was allegedly supporting Biden. And the problem is that other individuals get motivated and get triggered by that because they can't audit these large tech companies. And so that further creates a polarization, and that also further promotes certain conspiracy theories where people can say, yeah, you know what, big tech they're silencing the conservatives and they're promoting content that is let's say pro Biden, and they're silencing our voices. And since you don't really have tools through which you can audit it further creates these types of conspiracies. I've also seen actually a lot of tools that are made by conservative voices where they're allegedly showing the bias that these different groups have. And so, but again, the problem is that you don't know how these conservative tools are created.
Is there any basis in truth to these tools, or are they political in nature or ideological in nature?
I think that they're a lot ideological in nature. So they're promoting their own ideas.
I see. And are you optimistic about the prospect of technology uniting, for example, the United States or the people of the United States, or are you less optimistic about that?
Actually, I am optimistic, especially because I think that we can define the direction. And so I think that we have the power to define the direction that we want for these technologies. And it's just really sitting down and defining the pathway, understanding how these technologies can be weaponized and how we can position them to unite our citizens.
How does the Frankfurt School and the relationships of power factor into this process of artificial intelligence and technology in a world that seems to be increasingly divided?
So one of the things that the Frankfurt School did, especially we have with Marcuse, so he talked a lot about how technology and the media were able to promote certain agendas, certain propaganda, to get people, for instance, to buy certain things, to feel certain ways, to follow a certain ideology. And so we could argue that right now we're actually seeing a lot about what Marcuse was discussing. So within these algorithms that are on social media, they're pushing to us a certain type of content. They're telling us, oh, you have to buy this. You know what? You should support this political candidate. This might be what is happening. And so we could argue that some of these technologies are being used to maybe move us in certain ways. And so I think that as a society, it can be important to understand the type of power relationships that these large technologies have over citizens. How might these algorithms that are pushing to us certain content be promoting to us a certain type of ideology, and also as well silencing certain voices that might exist, and silencing certain political groups, etc. And so I think that they're examining those power relationships are helpful. And also understanding how it can also be weaponized by other actors to promote certain conspiracy theories as well.
I see. I think I can agree with you on a theoretical level. I'm having trouble understanding on a practical level what that means in terms of policy. How do we, because these things are, the recommendations you're making are often repeated, but then in practice, we get the reality that we have to live with. So are there any practical measures that leaders can implement to actually make these recommendations work?
Yeah, I was actually just working with Mexico's with policymakers in Mexico about this topic. I think part of it is ensuring that large tech companies provide ways in which third parties can audit them, especially because of these power dynamics that we're discussing. And so, for instance, maybe right now we feel comfortable because let's say that we don't support Trump. And so we feel comfortable with Twitter or Facebook removing their content, etc. But the problem is that they could also happen to a candidate that maybe we do support. And so we have to have ways in which we can actually audit what these large tech companies are doing and why they are doing it. And so I think that maybe providing data to academics, to NGOs, and allowing these third parties to audit them is would be a way in which we can start to question the power dynamics that are existing and start to do something in case that maybe a certain large tech company is promoting their own interests.
I see. And so at the moment, is there no ability for government to audit apart from, I don't know, maybe declaring a monopoly or something like that? There's no power to audit these companies?
Right now, it's very hard to audit them. And I would say also even digital labor platforms. Right now, I was developing tools, my own tools, through which I'm starting to audit these digital labor platforms. And that was how I found that workers were earning less than minimum wage. But these large tech companies are not providing that data.
I see. Okay, well, very good. And tell me about some of your favorite or more influential thinkers in AI today.
Yeah, so I've been influenced on one hand. I used a lot of Tom Mitchell's book on machine learning. I really like that book because it explained clearly the different machine learning methods. And it allowed me to understand them so that I could use them for my own research. I'm actually using a lot these old school books, for instance, from the Frankfurt School. And I'm finding them very helpful for me as I'm reanalyzing what is happening in the world. And so I would say one of my new that I've recently been reading a lot is actually from the Frankfurt School, which is Marcuse's One-Dimensional Man. And so here he was discussing a lot. It was written in 1962. However, I think that it's very relevant right now because it's discussing a lot about how, in a way, technology is making us believe that humanity is not as complex as it is. It's reducing it into this one-dimensional person. And if we become this one-dimensional person, then it means that we might not have a lot of decision making in our own lives. And so he uses a lot this book to discuss about how we're losing our critical critical thinking abilities. And so for me, this is helpful as well. So for me, these old school authors are very helpful for reanalyzing what is happening in our society today. And as you mentioned, questioning the power dynamics that we have. And so I would say that the books that influence me on one hand are just machine learning classics that help me to understand how different models work so that I can use them for my system building. But then also these books from old school philosophers who help me to re-examine what is happening in the world.
I see. And what would you respond to somebody who said that the Frankfurt School itself is highly ideological? How would you respond to that?
I think that with everything, we have to take it all with a grain of salt. And so that is also true that, I mean, you could argue that maybe the Frankfurt School was idealizing as well Marx and everything that Marx was saying. And so I think that as everything, you have to look at it critically. And you can't 100% believe let's say what school A is saying, but rather as you mentioned, look at everything critically. And so I think that you can use these different spaces as tools that help you I'm using them basically as tools to help me reanalyze the world. But everything taken with a grain of salt so that I'm not falling within a type of box, if that makes sense. But I think that it is important to criticize as well the different theories that might emerge.
Okay. And in terms of recent developments in AI, such as machine learning and deep learning, what are some of the tools that you think are the most interesting that are on the market now?
For me, it was actually seeing, I used to live near Pittsburgh, and so I was in Pittsburgh a lot. It was a lot seeing the self-driving cars in action. For me, that was a really interesting case where I was able to see, for me, what was interesting about the self-driving cars that Uber had was seeing how we could have now AI in the real world, functioning with us, the humans. And for me, this is interesting because this is creating also new types of jobs. For instance, you have a lot of new labelers that are behind the scenes labeling everything that is happening within the scenes of an Uber car. And so for me, it's interesting to understand, what does it mean to have AI now in the wild with us? What new social dynamics is it creating? What new power structures is it creating? And I think that for me, seeing AI directly in the wild is what is the most interesting, because now we have to question a lot of things. It's not just we have this algorithm that's in the lab and we're able to see it functioning. Now we have it impacting our school children, impacting the lives of a wide range of people, and that's also creating new types of dynamics that I'm very interested in analyzing.
I see. Very good. Okay. Well, I want to be very respectful of your time. So I'd like to ask one final question, and I'd like to ask it in Spanish, porque tú hablas español, ¿verdad?
Sí, vengo de la Ciudad de México, entonces me encanta hablar español también.
That's very interesting. That's quite a surprise, I think, for most people, because your English is perfect, and your name is also not immediately recognizable as a Spanish name. So tell us about your work in Mexico and what you do there.
So I'm originally from Mexico City, and I did my undergraduate at UNAM, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and right now I'm co-directing the Civic Innovation Lab in UNAM. What I'm currently doing with Mexico is I've been working with policymakers in Mexico and also the government. And with policymakers, I'm doing exactly what you mentioned. So really thinking along with them about, well, what can we do, for instance, with these large tech companies? What should we be regulating? I actually had, yesterday, we submitted a short report about the type of things that policymakers should look at when looking into cloud computing. Cloud computing has a problem that it could also be used for surveillance of citizens. It's also creating new types of social divisions within the country of companies who can access cloud computing and companies who can't access it. And so I was discussing a lot with them, what does cloud computing mean? What type of policy should they be looking at? And so I'm doing a lot of work there. I'm also working with Mexico's Ministry of Foreign Affairs to develop technology through which government can have better communication with citizens. Here I'm developing virtual assistants where I'm using AI to provide better services that the government offers to citizens. And so I really like working with Mexico in terms of it's a very interesting design space. There are less people that are focused on human-computer. So I focus on AI plus human-computer interaction. And I would say that right now there's an opportunity to bring in a lot of AI plus human-computer interaction into the country and have an impact. And so that excites me.
Excellent. Very good. So where can people follow you or your work, or what are your upcoming projects?
Oh, So you can either visit my website, which is saiph.org, or follow me on Twitter. There I'm up sharing a lot of content just by my name, Saiph Savage, or Saiph Sita. That's my Twitter handle. And there I'm sharing a lot of what I'm doing. We're actually going to publish an audio book about AI in Spanish. And we would love for you to join us in with our new audiobook. It's an audiobook that's very focused for the general public, so that anyone can understand what is AI, how does it relate to what we're seeing in the world.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely keep track of your work. I appreciate very much your time, and I wish you the best of luck in everything.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this invitation and fantastic discussion. Very interesting.
Stick around and let's reason together.